In this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 adaptations that you may need to make when you play squash. Now, they are for club players and competitive tournament players, so it's not really for beginners. But before I go into the 5 things, I want to just preface this by saying that there are times when what you should do is what you do. Okay, what does that mean? It means that if you do something really well, if you have a particular style of playing, I recognise that sometimes you just need to play like how you play. I think that the best I've ever played was when I limited the number of shots and I paid no attention to my opponent, because what I felt I did well, I really did well. But I also recognise that a lot of the time players need to make changes to situations. In fact, I think that a smart player, a player who can adapt to the 5 things that I'm about to talk about, will more often beat a player who just does one thing. Unless that is really what they do and they do it so well all of the time. But come on, the reality is that you don't do one thing really well all of the time. So, on the screen in a moment, you can see those 5 things. They are adapting to yourself, adapting to your opponent, adapting to the court, adapting to the situation, and the last one is a little bit of a stretch, adapting to the universe. You can see the times they start. Down the bottom are YouTube's chapter dividers, and there are quick jump links in the text description. So you can go to any part that interests you the most. So let's get started. All right, so let's talk about you, adapting to yourself. You are not a machine. And even if you were a machine, that doesn't mean that you perform in exactly the same way every single time. The smart player will look at themselves and say, what do I need to change based on how I am performing today? And those things could be, you could have more or less energy. If you've got a lot of energy, you might play a slightly different type of game. You might go for more volleys. If you've got less energy, you might play a slightly defensive game. But what's important is that you make an acknowledgement. I need to change my game based on how I'm feeling. You might be more or less motivated. How that makes a change to your game, I'm not really sure. And I also want to say that I'm not necessarily going to be telling you everything you need to do to adapt. I'm just talking about the adaptations that you might need to make. You're more or less motivated, determined. That makes a big difference as well. What's working well? And of course, the counter of that, what's not working well? You need to decide as you start to play in the warm-up, is something working well of my game? If it's not, maybe I shouldn't be playing it. Is something working is something working well? And if it is, then maybe play it. And if not, don't play it. Now, the key here is deciding what to do when you do recognize that something's not working well. Imagine that you have a really good working boast. It's not too obvious. You don't hit it too hard, so your opponent has to really go forward. It's not much above the tin. It's got that second bounce coming very close to the nick. It's a great shot. But in the first game that you play, it's not working. It's hit the tin a couple of times. Your opponent is reading it because this opponent can see what you're doing. You're hitting it too hard or too high. Do you persevere and hope that it will improve, or change it? Wow. I can't tell you that. What I can tell you, though, is that the moment you've recognised that you need to make a change, you have made a difference to your game. You'll be more conscious of it. And I would say that if it hasn't worked in the first game, maybe try the second game, but probably don't play it, especially if your opponent is reading it. And that's a very specific situation. There could be other things, but you need to make those changes based on how you're feeling each time. So I'd very much like to hear the kind of things that you adapt about yourself and what changes you make. On to the second one. Now, the second one is your opponent. Now, if you're playing a competitive match, there is a chance that you haven't seen this player before. So making adaptations based on your opponent in those circumstances can be incredibly challenging, which is why playing tournaments is so good for you, because you really have to think about what's happening. Now imagine that you've played this opponent many times. What you shouldn't do is assume that you know how they play. You should say, I know how they have played, but whether that's true today. Jonah Barrington always used to say, I come off the court knowing more about my opponent than he knows about me. I've learned more about him. And you can't always use the first game just to learn about your opponent. Obviously, you're trying to win it. But you need to look at your opponent. You need to decide, what is this player doing well and what are they not doing well? Where are they winning most of their points? Where are they losing most of their points? If you find that your boast is working quite well and then they're hitting lots of drops into the nick, well, your boasts aren't working that well, are they? So you've got to make changes based on them. Based on their fitness, perhaps. Do they look like somebody who could get tired? And be very careful with that. There are some people who look tired all of the time, but can go for days and days. There are other people who look incredibly fit, but then they lose a lot of energy towards the end of the match. Is my opponent tall? Is my opponent short? Does my opponent like to volley? Does my opponent hit hard straight drives or more cross courts? What does your opponent do? You need to notice that, and then you need to make changes based on that. If your opponent hits lots of cross courts, well, maybe you can keep your racket up and look for that volley block to put the ball short. If your opponent hits lots of boasts, is that because they're tired, because you're hitting great shots, or is it because they like to work you? In which case, if you can, drop when they boast so that you're working them more. Every time they make you work, you make them work a little bit more. So that second one is really looking at your opponent, seeing what's happening, and then deciding what changes do I need to make to my game to counter what they're doing. The third one, the court. Now the court could be hot, it could be cold, it could be slippery, it could have sprung floors or not sprung floors. Now, with regard to the sprung floor and not sprung floor, I'm not really sure that there's much you could change about that, but you certainly wouldn't want to be diving, so maybe that's one change that you'd want to be thinking about. Are the walls a little damp? Is it near a swimming pool? Is the ceiling high? Every single court is different and every single wall is different. During the warm-up, and I use the warm-up to mean the time that you're hitting the ball, not the time that you are preparing, because that's the heat-up, remember. During that time, you should be hitting boasts on both sides, finding out if there are parts of the wall that respond differently. And I know that sounds very focused, and I'm just a club player, Philip, but you might find that you sort of hit some shots and one side of the wall seems a little bit dead and another side doesn't, and then down the side wall, whoa, hitting boasts off this wall because it's an outside wall doesn't seem as bouncy, whereas this wall, it's an internal wall, there's another court next to it, maybe it bounces more. So you've got to look at that. You've got to, if there's height, can you use it? If it's very low, maybe you can use that to your advantage. You can make sure that people don't lob so much because it's a little bit harder. So all I'm asking you to do is become much more aware about the court that you play on. And that's why I started by talking about tournament players and competition players, because maybe you visit more clubs, you go to different places. If you're totally accustomed to the one or two courts that you play on, this part might not be important to you, but it could be. On to the fourth one. The fourth one is essentially the situation itself. Is it an individual knockout tournament? Is it a round robin? A round robin is where you've got like a group of 4 players. Each player plays against the other 3 players. You play the best of 3, and then normally the winner from that group goes forward and the second one goes into a smaller competition. There are some kind of things like that. Is it a team competition? In a sense, it's inter-club. Your team, your club playing against another team. Now, these make a difference. If you're playing in a knockout tournament, you can't afford to lose. You have to win. And that makes a difference to your mentality. If you're playing in a round robin and you've won the first 2 games and everybody else has lost, well, not everybody else because it wouldn't work that way, but if it looks like all you need to do is get a couple of games, because maybe the scoring is based on not who wins but how many games, your mentality will be a little bit different. You might not want to show your best shots to this particular player. You might want to be a little bit more conservative. You're very tired, so maybe it's less important if I win. Now, if you're playing in a team, it depends when you're playing. If you're playing last, and when I used to play with five players in a team, if your team has already won 4-love, you can talk to the team captain and say, is it important I win this? Because the points matter. Or he might say to you, look, just go. You've got a chance to beat this player. He's a higher ranked player. Just go for it. Have some fun. So that situation could be different. If you've travelled a long distance, now that might relate to how you're feeling, but maybe you've got meetings the next day, or you've got to do some work, or anything related to the situation that's not about you, your opponent, and about the court. What point in the season it is? Is it at the beginning of the season where you want to establish, a rhythm, or is it the end of the season where it's not so important? Is it part of your goals? Do you have, this tournament is one of the ones that I really want to win, or this tournament's not one that I want to win, so I can be a little bit more adventurous? All of those things matter. Are you playing somebody you've played 100 times before and they've beaten you every single time? Okay, well, that makes a difference as well, and that's a separate thing. And on to the last one. The universe. Crikey, what is the universe? Well, the universe is the marker. Whether there's a leak on the court, whether you've got a player who gets injured and then has to start again. I'm talking about luck. I'm talking about fortune. And how you respond to that, how you adapt to that, can be really important. Now, you might argue that that's part of the situation, and I wouldn't fight you too much about it. But I also feel that it is a separate thing. It's something that can be totally random. You might know that this tournament was always going to be one of your important ones, but you didn't know that the referee that you were going to have hated you because you beat him every single time in the previous tournaments. I don't know, something like this. But of course, referees shouldn't be basing their decisions on whether they like you or not. Of course not. So the universe can come along and it can do these things to us, and your match is delayed. You're hot, you're ready to go. Oh yeah, no, sorry, there's a leak on the court. You can't play on this one. You have to play 2 matches afterwards. Okay, well, how do you adapt to that? What do you do? What changes do you make? You're playing a referee who doesn't give you anything, and he seems to be best friends with your opponent, and he gives him or her everything. That's not fair. Tough. Life can be difficult sometimes, but it's how you respond to those difficulties that separates the successful from the not successful. Not always, because sometimes there's a lot of luck involved, and that's really what I'm talking about. You've got to adapt to what you're given. A phrase in English is you have to play the cards you're dealt. And this is talking about cards. Yeah, maybe the guy next to you has got, 4 kings and an ace, and then you've got like some horrible hand. Well, that's the way it goes. You're probably not going to win that one, but how you respond to it is the key thing. So those were the 5 adaptations. Hopefully, you agree with them. And as I mentioned in the first one, feel free to comment about the adaptations you needed to make. So maybe there was a little bit of a leak and it was a little bit wet. What changes did you make there? Well, obviously you don't hit the ball there because you don't want it to skid. You had a bad marker, or the event, your team had won already, so you beat somebody that you would have never beaten. I'm interested to hear all of your experiences about your adaptations. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching. And here is a subscription button. If and only if you think my content is useful, please consider subscribing and maybe even giving this video a thumbs up. Over here is a collection of other 5 things videos that hopefully you'll enjoy. And down here is a video that YouTube thinks is a good fit for you based on what you've been watching. And remember, do something every single day, no matter how small, to improve your squash. See ya.